Hi everyone, welcome to Module 9. This video lecture will be about contextual behavior trauma therapy, experiential and emotion-focused therapies, and EMDR, which is short for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Contextual behavior trauma therapy is a synthesis of what Follett, Iverson, and Ford call the third-generation behavioral therapy. It rests on the foundation of behavior analytic therapy and CBT traditions in general, as well as acceptance and commitment therapy. The overall goal is to identify and modify the stimulus response chains which arise from post-traumatic stress, with the goals of enhancing mindfulness, acceptance, and establishing and nurturing a therapeutic relationship. Our authors give an example of how the stimulus response systems we've previously discussed as features of classical and operant conditioning may play out in a PTSD scenario. A woman who was abused by an adult male who drinks finds the smell of alcohol on her husband's breath frightening. This automatic triggering leads her to avoid her partner, even when there is no danger. He's not abusive, and he's had just, let's say, a glass of wine. But because of her response to this situation and triggering, she avoids her husband, which brings her momentary relief from her response, but which in the long run has the effect of isolating her in her relationship. However, if she can learn to talk with her husband about this, it could, on the other hand, lead to increased trust and intimacy in the relationship. If she continues to avoid, this behavior can become generalized to other situations and circumstances in her relationship and also in her life in general. This avoidance keeps her from being able to develop more adaptive responses and ways of dealing with her triggers and her reactions to them. This type of avoidance has been termed experiential avoidance, and it plays a central role in the long-term outcomes associated with abuse history. Negative private thoughts like self-blaming and self-shaming result in negative coping strategies in order to avoid or to deal with these thoughts. And these can include dissociation, self-injury, numbing, substance use, somatization, and other responses. A CBT therapist will be striving, therefore, to work with clients to develop a continuous self. In other words, the capacity to observe and label feelings from the I perspective, which is often fragmented in sexual abuse survivors. The therapist will teach skills and use exercises to help clients become mindful and self-aware in noticing and labeling perceptions, feelings, and thoughts that occur in the moment during their sessions. The goal is to enhance capacity for focused attention and increase the client's ability to recognize and reduce or manage episodes of self-detachment, especially for those who experience dissociation or depersonalization. CBTT has a seemingly paradoxical goal in that on the one hand, we're trying to foster a sense of being connected to one's personal history, and at the same time, we have a self that is not limited or irrevocably defined by that history. In other words, we're looking to promote both self-integration and self-differentiation. This is critical to enabling survivors to seek, sustain, select, and sustain healthier and safer relationships. CBT approaches share several components of what our authors label the third wave of behavioral therapies. This includes an emphasis on the contextual nature of the work. In other words, a focus on function of behavior rather than simply the form the behavior takes. It also includes the notion of radical acceptance, which is to say that we apply a non-judgmental approach to looking at our behaviors and reactions. Another shared component is the behavioral activation piece, which is a feature of all behavioral approaches. There are three main approaches which fall under the contextual behavioral trauma therapy category, including acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, which we've already discussed in a previous module, and functional analysis psychotherapy. Acceptance and commitment therapy was first developed in the late 80s by Stephen Hayes, Kelly Wilson, and Kirk Stroschel. The ACT approach emphasizes the enhancements of acceptance, willingness, psychological flexibility, and the notion of valued living as a means of challenging and reducing experiential avoidance. Clients are encouraged to examine their own life directions, notice how their avoidance strategies limit them from living the life they desire, and commit to meaningful behavioral change. ACT therapists treat trauma-related problems by encouraging acceptance of private experiences, including trauma-related thoughts and intrusions, as well as emotional states. A 2015 review in the journal Psychotherapy and Somatics found that ACT was better than placebo and typical treatment for anxiety disorders, depression, and addiction, and that it was as effective as traditional treatments like CBT for depression, anxiety disorders, addiction, and somatic health problems. A criticism that's been leveled at ACT is that some think that it is not substantially different from other CBT approaches. Indeed, there is a great deal of crossover, as you may already be picking up, between all of the approaches we've discussed so far. Again, I think this emphasizes that we need a variety of tools and approaches in our toolkit, that although there are indeed a lot of similarities, it may be the subtle differences that make a lot of difference when using these approaches with any one particular client. One of the models of ACT is that based on many of the core problems people experience are based on fear, and so they have an acronym associated with fear. Fusion with your thoughts, so being too attached to your thoughts, evaluation of your experience, and usually a poor evaluation, avoidance of your experience, and then reason giving for your behavior. The healthy alternative to ACT is to act. Rather than be stuck in fear, rather to act. So to accept your reactions and be present, to choose a valued direction, and to take action. Good recommendations. A good resource to find out more about ACT is the Association for Contextual and Behavioral Science website. And that's the URL and not just a screenshot of the page that you go to. And I really recommend that you check it out. I know that there has been some training provided here at UB in ACT as well. So there you go. Another contextual approach is functional analytic psychotherapy, or FAP. FAP was first conceptualized in the 1980s by psychologists Robert Kohlenberg and Mavis Tsai. They noticed that there was a clinically significant association between client outcomes and the quality of the therapeutic relationship, and set out to develop a theoretical model based on those concepts. FAP emphasizes clinically relevant behaviors, including avoidance behaviors, of course, that occur in therapy, and parallel behaviors the clients may be experiencing outside of therapy. It is similar to the psychotherapeutic approach of addressing transference reactions that happen in therapy, which we've discussed in a previous module. However, the FAP therapist uses functional analysis to identify and shape the clinically relevant behaviors, while also reinforcing improvements and accurate interpretations of behaviors, both in and out of the therapy session. FAP uses intense interpersonal relationships as vehicles for change, and has been used effectively with people with chronic post-traumatic stress. Another model that has become associated with FAP is from researchers at the Center for the Science of Social Connection at the University of Washington. It delineates behaviors they believe are relevant to social connection based on decades of scientific research. And that's the ACL model, with awareness is the A, and that refers to behaviors including paying attention to your own and the other's needs and values within an interpersonal relationship, so awareness of behaviors. The C is having courage. Having courage to look at behaviors, including experiencing emotion in the presence of another person, asking for what you need, and sharing deep, vulnerable experiences with another person in the service of improving the relationship. The L refers to love. And these are behaviors, these behaviors involve responding to another's courage with attunement to what that person needs in the moment. These include providing safety and acceptance in response to a client's vulnerability on the part of the therapist. Again, if you want to find out more about FAP, this is the URL to a website that has a lot more information, and you can find out more about when trainings might be available and more references and frequently asked questions. A CBTT model to working with survivors of complex traumatic stress is one which integrates techniques from ACT, DBT, and FAP in a phased approach. These basic phases are familiar to us already and include a phase 1 of stability, establishing therapeutic alliance and self-awareness, and a phase 2 of an acceptance-based exposure to working with traumatic memories. Case examples of these are in your text, and I encourage you to read through them carefully. Our authors point out that although it is important to maintain fidelity to the principles and procedures of these approaches, the overall CBTT approach uses a functional analysis strategy to identify which aspects will work best for each client. Again, there's that notion that there's not one size that fits all. What is very important in the process is a functional analysis of the behaviors that are problematic for clients. The first step is in defining the problem behaviors, which may include substance use, dissociation, self-harm, PTSD-related problems, etc. The second step is determining the internal and external antecedents or links in the chain. This will include an assessment of physiological sensations, vulnerabilities, emotions, cognitions, and overt behaviors. Antecedents may include feelings of fear or shame or anxiety, and consequences may include temporary relief provided by avoidance or substance using, or other negative coping strategies and behaviors. The third step is identifying both internal barriers to resolution, like a lack of awareness and difficulty regulating emotions, and external barriers, like being in conflictual and invalidating relationships. The fourth step is generating behaviors that promote acceptance and change, like noticing emotional arousal and action urges before they become extreme, and using distress tolerance skills to modulate such arousal. The fifth step is agreeing to attempt and commit to the potential solutions identified. The sixth step of experimenting and evaluating involves enacting those potential solutions and observing the outcomes. And the seventh step is refining those solutions based on the outcome of experimentation and developing further changes to the behavioral chain as necessary. In order to be skillful in practicing this modality, and indeed in any modality, it is important to not just talk the talk, but also to walk the walk. In other words, applying the principles of mindfulness and acceptance and awareness of all the intricacies of the dynamics of behavioral exchanges is just as important for us as therapists as it is for our clients. This is part of the reason that we're continually emphasizing self-care in this class, but also in general in the UB program. Although we obviously will not be sharing the personal details of our journey with these issues with our clients, I think that clients will be able to pick up on whether we are authentically related to these processes and whether we see value in them for our own lives. So I want to shift now to the more emotion rather than behaviorally focused approaches, specifically to emotion-focused therapy for trauma, or EFTT for short. I know it's a lot of acronyms, I'm sorry about that. And also experiential dynamic therapy, or AEDP for short. Developed by Diana Fosha, AEDP assumes that trauma survivors possess core bioaffective resources and that it's possible to activate these resources therapeutically in the right, safe, and facilitating environment. Accelerated experiential dynamic therapy draws from attachment theory and research, emotion theory, affective neuroscience, Gestalt therapy, and other transformational studies. Key elements include dyadic affect regulation of intense emotions, and a primary aim of not having the client be alone with their intense emotional experiences. In this way, AEDP seeks to directly address the emotional dysregulation and social isolation which so many with complex traumatic disorders suffer. With AEDP, there is a primary focus on developing the therapeutic alliance to the degree that it can serve as a secure base from which the client can experience the full range of their emotions. A secure base is built through affective engagement, which means communicating with explicit empathy and affirmation. It also involves emotional transparency, which refers to the therapist's willingness to both see and to be deeply seen. Another feature of this relational stance is an explicit willingness to help. This approach aligns with the basics of attachment theory in terms of providing clients a secure base to return to from their emotional explorations. The primary aim is to co-create a new, positive relationship in the therapy room that can then be a foundation for clients as they forge new relationships outside of therapy. The idea of a secure base is easy to conceptualize. However, the process of AEDP is actually rather complicated. It involves transformations from state one, which is identifying the defenses and consequences of stress, distress, and symptoms the client is having and how they are operating in their lives or failing to do so. In state one, we're also looking at dysregulated affects like anxiety and shame. Moving a client to state two, which is really looking at core affect in a conscious way, involves establishing and co-creating safety and dealing with transitional affect that emerges in undertaking the process of explorations. The state two of core affect is identifying and categorizing emotions, coordinating relational experiences, and being able to explore the intricacies of interrelational dynamics. Moving to state three involves engendering secure attachment and dealing with both the positive and negative affects that arise during this transformation. State three, the core state, is where we hopefully take our clients to the ability to act adaptively and naturally, to experience positive emotions like calm, flow, vitality, ease, creativity, confidence, relaxation, etc. Examples of this complexity are represented in case examples in your text. Overall, in AEDP, safety is achieved through the dyadic regulation and experiential processing of emotion and relatedness in every single aspect and state of therapy. In other words, safety is not a first phase, but it is critical throughout. Certainly that should be the case for every therapy we undertake, but in this case it is built into the phased concept. To learn more about accelerated experiential dynamic therapy, you can visit their website. There's a lot of information there, including training schedules and such like that. Another emotion-focused therapy is EFTT, or emotion-focused trauma therapy. It grows out of original work done with couples in the 80s by Sue Johnson and Les Greenberg, and later work in the 90s by Greenberg and Pavio. Also using attachment theory, Johnson developed emotion-focused therapy to help couples in distress who were caught in patterns of negative interactions. EFTC for couples is one of the most empirically validated types of couple therapy. More recently, emotionally focused therapy has also been used with families, specifically children and parents. Authors and trainers recently associated with the EFTT modality are Sandor Pavio and Antonio Pascual Leon. Like all experiential approaches, emotion-focused trauma therapy is encouraging clients to verbally symbolize their present moment subjective experience. Mouthful, but it means their feelings and the meanings of their feelings. And the idea that this is the primary source of new information, growth, and ultimately healing for our clients. The authors of a recent book on EFTT explain that emotion-focused therapy for trauma is grounded in current experiential therapy theory and research, and integrates recent developments in the areas of emotion, affective neuroscience, attachment, and trauma. They further explain that child abuse trauma is associated with a constellation of long-term effects, and disruptive emotional processes are at the core of this constellation. These include symptom distress like depression, social anxiety, PTSD, emotion regulation difficulties, dysregulation, avoidance or over-control, and self and relational problems. EFTT includes strategies for reprocessing trauma feelings and memories and working directly with emotional processes to bring about client change. Therapy focuses in particular on unresolved feelings like anger, sadness, fear, guilt, shame, and unmet needs in relation to abusive and neglectful others in their lives, usually primary attachment figures. EFTT posits that the therapeutic relationship and emotional processing of trauma memories are mechanisms of change. The emphasis is on accessing previously inhibited adaptive feelings and meanings, for instance, anger at being violated or sadness at having experienced a loss, so that the adaptive information associated with these emotions can be used to modify maladaptive meanings associated with fear, avoidance, and shame. The primary intervention used to resolve attachment injuries is imaginal confrontation. This is where clients imagine perpetrators of abuse or neglect in an empty chair and express their thoughts and feelings about the abuse directly to those imagined others. This procedure quickly accesses core processes, including fear, avoidance, and shame, that become the focus of subsequent therapeutic exploration and change. EFTT is a semi-structured, manualized approach, typically consisting of 16 to 20 weekly one-hour sessions. It's been demonstrated to be helpful to both men and women. As with the other modalities, there is a case example of working in the EFTT mode in your text, and I encourage you to have a look at that. In terms of some of the commonalities between AEDP and EFTT, both of the emotion-focused ones, they're both very well articulated. Both have a lot of information behind them, really good training. They share the focus on increasing the client's abilities to be aware of and utilize core adaptive emotions, express the full range of the emotional experience, and experience health and intimate interpersonal relationships. Both of them view the therapeutic relationship and the emotional processing of trauma memories as fundamental change agents. And they both rely on the therapist's observation of the somatic, so what's happening in the client's body, and affective, what feelings are they expressing, markers to guide intervention. There are some differences between AEDP and EFTT. AEDP has a more specific focus on and experiential processing of the dyadic aspects of the relational experience, so the client-therapist relationship. EFTT focuses more on the task of resolving issues with specific abusive and neglectful others. And EFTT at this point also has a bit of a more scientific evidence base. In 1987, Francine Shapiro was walking in the park when she realized that eye movements appeared to decrease the negative emotion associated with her own distressing memories. She assumed that eye movements had a desensitizing effect, and when she experimented with this, she found that others also had the same response. It became apparent, however, that eye movements by themselves did not create comprehensive therapeutic effects. And so she added other treatment elements, including a cognitive component, and developed a standard procedure that she called eye movement desensitization. She then conducted a case study and a controlled study to test the effectiveness of EMD. In the controlled study, she randomly assigned 22 individuals with traumatic memories to two conditions. Half got the EMD, and half received the same therapeutic procedure with imagery and detailed description, replacing the eye movements. She reported that EMD resulted in significant decreases in states and ratings of subjective distress and significant increases in ratings of confidence in a positive belief. Participants in the eye movement condition reported significantly larger changes than those in the imagery condition. Since that time, numerous other studies have confirmed this result, including the 2007 article first authored by Bessel van der Kolk that compared EMDR favorably to depression medication prescribed for PTSD. They found that EMD conferred more benefit for trauma survivors than SSRI medication or placebo. Many other studies have been done as well. EMDR has been compared to numerous exposure therapy protocols, both with and without cognitive therapy techniques. A recent meta-analysis by Bisson and colleagues in 2013 finds that CBT and EMDR therapy are superior to all other treatments they were compared to for the treatment of chronic PTSD in adults. EMDR is an 8-phase treatment. Eye movements or other bilateral stimulation are used during one part of the session. This could be using clickers or sound or tapping instruments, in addition to the visual flowing of fingers or objects or lights moving side to side. There's a number of different techniques that you can use. After the clinician has determined which memory to target first, he asks the client to hold different aspects of that event or thought in mind and uses his eyes to track the therapist's hand as it moves back and forth across the client's field of vision, or taps back and forth, or listens back and forth. As this happens, for reasons believed by a Harvard researcher to be connected with the biological mechanisms involved in REM, rapid eye movement sleep, internal associations arise and the client begins to process the memory and disturbing feelings. In successful EMDR therapy, the meaning of painful events is transformed on an emotional level. For instance, a rape victim shifts from feeling horror and self-disgust, or perhaps blaming themselves, to holding the firm belief that I survived it and I'm strong. Unlike talk therapy, the insights clients gain in EMDR therapy result not so much from clinician interpretation, but from the client's own accelerated intellectual and emotional processes. The net effect is that clients conclude EMDR therapy feeling empowered by the very experiences that once debased them. Their wounds have not just closed, they have transformed. As a natural outcome of the EMDR therapeutic process, the client's thoughts, feelings, and behavior are all robust indicators of emotional health and resolution, all without speaking in detail or doing homework used in other therapies. Access to training and lots of resources about EMDR can be found at the EMDRIA website. The trainings are a bit pricey, but I would say that every single experienced trauma therapist I know, and I do know several, who work with survivors of sexual trauma has found this technique to be invaluable and well worth the investment. So today we have touched on several modalities that are mostly focused on behavior and emotions, including contextual behavior trauma therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, functional analytic psychotherapy, accelerated experiential dynamic therapy, and emotion-focused trauma therapy. We've also touched on eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a bit more of a cognitive process. I hope you will see from this that although we can't delve too deeply into any one particular modality in the course of this class, that there actually are quite a variety of evidence-based and different approaches that you can take as a therapist working with survivors. I hope you will find those that resonate with you and go on to seek specific training to add new tools to your therapy toolkit.